Have you ever reached a point where you realize that explaining, reacting, and trying to be understood is only leaving you more exhausted? What if the real shift doesn't come from saying more, but from quietly changing how you show up, how you protect your energy, and how you choose yourself without needing anyone else to agree? When people talk about wanting a narcissist to feel the pain they caused, what they are often really expressing is a deep need to be seen, validated, and acknowledged. After enduring manipulation, dismissal, or emotional erosion, it's natural to want the other person to finally understand the impact of their behavior. But here is the hard truth most people don't hear early enough. Trying to actively cause pain almost always keeps you trapped in the same dynamic that hurt you in the first place. Narcissistic patterns are built on control and reaction. When you seek revenge, confrontation, or emotional payback, you are still responding to them, still orbiting their behavior. That response, even if fueled by anger or righteousness, keeps them psychologically relevant. In many cases, it even reinforces their sense of importance. They may deny your pain, minimize it, or twist it, but they are still at the center of the story. Consequences work differently. Consequences are not about punishment, they are about reality. They emerge naturally when someone's behavior is no longer accommodated, excused, or absorbed by others. A narcissistic person often moves through relationships protected from consequences because someone else is always explaining, smoothing, forgiving, or staying quiet to keep the peace. When that stops, something shifts. The pain they experience from consequences is not dramatic or explosive. It is subtle and deeply unsettling to them. It shows up when access is limited, when emotional reactions dry up, when their influence no longer shapes your choices. This kind of impact doesn't come from confrontation or long explanations. It comes from consistency, from doing the same healthy thing over and over, regardless of whether they approve. For someone used to control, the loss of control is disorienting. When their usual tactics stop working, they are forced to face a version of reality they spend their lives avoiding. They may feel ignored, sidelined, or irrelevant, not because you are trying to make them feel that way, but because you are no longer organizing your life around their reactions. This is where many people struggle. It can feel passive or unsatisfying, especially when you are carrying unresolved hurt. There is often a strong urge to make them admit what they did or to see visible remorse. But narcissistic patterns rarely allow for that kind of accountability. Waiting for it can keep you stuck for years. Consequences don't require the other person to agree with you. They don't require insight or apology. They simply require you to act differently, to stop explaining your needs to someone committed to misunderstanding them, to stop negotiating your worth, to stop offering access to someone who consistently harms you. What makes this painful for a narcissistic person is not that you are trying to hurt them, but that you are no longer available to be used as emotional regulation, validation, or supply. They feel the absence of your energy more than they would ever feel your anger. Anger still engages them. Absence does not. There is also a quiet dignity in this approach. You are not becoming someone you are not. You are not abandoning your values. You are simply allowing cause and effect to exist. When someone repeatedly crosses boundaries, they lose closeness. When someone refuses accountability, they lose trust. These are not punishments. They are outcomes. Over time, this shift can be deeply uncomfortable for them because it removes the narrative they rely on. They can no longer cast themselves as the misunderstood center of your emotional world. Your focus turns inward, toward healing, stability, and self-respect. That change alone can feel like a loss to someone who depended on your attention, compliance, or emotional labor. This is why consequences are so powerful. They don't escalate conflict. They don't create new wounds. They don't require you to revisit old pain repeatedly. They simply draw a line where chaos used to be and consistency takes its place. One of the most misunderstood ideas when dealing with narcissistic behavior is the belief that confrontation is the path to relief. People often think that if they just explain clearly enough, express enough emotion, or finally say everything they've been holding in, the other person will understand and change. But emotional engagement is exactly where narcissistic dynamics thrive. Strong reactions, whether anger, sadness, or desperation, become fuel rather than resolution. Emotional disengagement doesn't mean becoming cold, cruel, or indifferent in a forced way. It means stepping out of the emotional tug-of-war that keeps you exhausted and confused. It's the quiet decision to stop offering your feelings as something that can be debated, dismissed, or used against you. This shift can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to explaining yourself or trying to keep harmony at your own expense. In narcissistic dynamics, emotion is often used as leverage. Your reactions give information. They show what matters to you, what hurts you, and where your limits are. That information can then be exploited, intentionally or not. When you disengage emotionally, you remove that leverage. Conversations become shorter. Responses become neutral. You stop volunteering personal details that will later be weaponized. This is where people worry they're being unfair or avoidant. But emotional disengagement is not about avoiding responsibility or suppressing feelings. It's about choosing where your emotional energy goes. You can still process your feelings privately or with safe people. You're simply no longer placing them in the hands of someone who has shown they can't handle them with care. To someone with narcissistic patterns, this change can be deeply unsettling. They are accustomed to being the emotional center of interactions, even if that center is conflict. When your tone stays calm and your reactions are minimal, the usual scripts stop working. Attempts to provoke, guilt, or dramatize may increase at first because the system is trying to restore balance. That phase can be confusing, and it's where consistency matters most. Emotional disengagement is not silence as punishment. It's silence as protection. You are not trying to teach them a lesson. You are simply refusing to participate in exchanges that leave you drained or doubting yourself. Over time, this changes the emotional landscape. What once felt chaotic becomes predictable. What once felt urgent loses its intensity. There is also an internal shift that happens. When you stop reacting emotionally, you start observing more clearly. Patterns become easier to see. You notice how often conversations circle back to them, how accountability is deflected, how empathy is conditional. This clarity can be painful, but it's also grounding. It helps you trust your own perceptions again. For the narcissistic person, the lack of emotional reaction can feel like a loss of connection or relevance. They may describe you as distant or changed. In reality, you are no longer playing the role they assigned you. You are not the emotional regulator, the fixer, or the audience. That absence is felt more strongly than any argument because it removes the emotional feedback they depend on. What makes emotional disengagement powerful is that it does not escalate conflict. It doesn't create new stories or reopen old wounds. It quietly shifts the dynamic without announcement. You're not trying to win or prove a point. You're choosing peace over performance, stability over intensity. This approach also protects your nervous system. Chronic emotional engagement in toxic dynamics keeps the body in a state of stress and vigilance. Disengagement allows your system to settle. You start responding rather than reacting. You regain access to your own thoughts instead of constantly managing someone else's emotions. In the end, emotional disengagement is not about depriving someone else. It's about returning to yourself. And in dynamics built on reaction and control, that return is often the most disruptive change of all. Boundaries are often misunderstood, especially by people who have spent a long time in emotionally difficult relationships. Many believe boundaries are meant to punish, threaten, or force someone else to behave better. In reality, boundaries are not tools of control. They are statements of self-respect. They communicate what you will and will not participate in, regardless of how the other person responds. In narcissistic dynamics, boundaries are frequently blurred or ignored. Needs are reframed as demands, limits are treated as personal attacks, and consistency is challenged through guilt or pressure. Over time, this can train someone to believe that having boundaries is selfish or dangerous. That belief keeps the cycle going because without boundaries, there are no limits to overreach. A healthy boundary doesn't require long explanations or emotional justifications. In fact, the more you explain, the more space there is for debate. Boundaries work best when they are clear, simple, and repeatable. They are about what you will do, not what the other person must do. This distinction matters because it shifts the focus from controlling behavior to managing your own actions. When boundaries are introduced consistently, they communicate reality. Reality says that certain behaviors lead to less access, less engagement, or less emotional closeness. This is not punishment, it's cause and effect. If someone repeatedly interrupts, the conversation ends. If someone dismisses your feelings, you stop sharing them. If someone crosses a line, you remove yourself from the situation. These responses are grounded and predictable. For someone with narcissistic patterns, this can be deeply uncomfortable. They are often accustomed to pushing limits and watching others bend. When a boundary is enforced without anger or drama, it removes the usual entry points for manipulation. There is nothing to argue with, no emotional hook, just a consistent response that doesn't change based on pressure. At first, boundaries may be tested. You might see attempts to negotiate, minimize, or reframe them. This is not a sign that the boundary is wrong. It's a sign that the dynamic is shifting. Staying calm and consistent during this phase is crucial. Each time you hold the boundary without escalating, you reinforce a new reality. Boundaries also protect your internal world. They reduce the mental energy spent anticipating reactions or rehearsing explanations. When you know what you will do in a given situation, there is less confusion. That clarity can feel stabilizing after long periods of emotional unpredictability. One of the hardest parts of setting boundaries is tolerating the other person's discomfort. Many people are conditioned to fix, soothe, or explain away negative reactions. But boundaries are not about managing someone else's emotions. Allowing discomfort without rushing to resolve it is part of honoring your own limits. Over time, consistent boundaries change how you see yourself. You begin to trust your own judgment. You stop second-guessing your needs. This internal shift is often more important than how the other person reacts. You are no longer defining yourself through their approval or understanding. For the narcissistic person, boundaries can feel like a loss of influence. They no longer have unlimited access to your time, energy, or emotional labor. This loss is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet and steady, and that steadiness is what makes it impactful. Boundaries also remove confusion. Instead of mixed messages or emotional swings, there is predictability. Predictability doesn't feed chaos. It doesn't invite power struggles. It simply exists. In dynamics that rely on control and instability, that consistency can feel confronting. Ultimately, boundaries are not walls meant to shut people out. They are structures that support healthier interaction, or, when that isn't possible, healthier distance. They communicate that your well-being matters enough to be protected, even when it's uncomfortable for someone else. One of the most uncomfortable experiences for someone with narcissistic patterns is witnessing another person heal and grow after being harmed. Not because healing is wrong, but because it quietly exposes what they work hard to avoid within themselves. When you begin to recover, rebuild, and strengthen your sense of self, it shifts the entire emotional balance of the relationship, even if there is little or no direct contact. Healing is not loud. It doesn't announce itself with arguments or explanations. It shows up in small, steady changes. You become less reactive. You stop seeking validation from the same source. You begin making choices that prioritize your well-being instead of managing someone else's emotions. These changes might seem subtle to you, but they are often deeply noticeable to someone who relied on your vulnerability or self-doubt. In narcissistic dynamics, another person's insecurity often plays an unspoken role. When you question yourself, over-explain, or seek reassurance, it reinforces a sense of superiority or control. As you heal, those behaviors fade. You trust yourself more. You no longer need constant confirmation that your feelings are valid. This internal shift can feel destabilizing to someone who benefited from your uncertainty. Growth also changes what you tolerate. you start recognizing patterns earlier. Disrespect doesn't get endless chances. Dismissive behavior doesn't get reframed as misunderstanding. This isn't about becoming harsh or unforgiving. It's about clarity. And clarity removes the fog that once allowed unhealthy dynamics to continue. There is a quiet contrast that emerges when one person grows and the other remains stuck. Your emotional language becomes calmer and more grounded. You express needs without urgency. You disengage from circular arguments. This contrast can highlight emotional limitations without a single word being said. It's not something you're trying to show. It's simply the result of doing your own work. For someone who struggles with empathy and accountability, this contrast can feel like exposure. Not because you're pointing fingers, but because your stability reflects what they lack. You don't need to accuse them of being unable to connect deeply. Your capacity to connect with yourself and others speaks for itself. Healing also expands your world. You invest in friendships, interests, and routines that nourish you. Your life no longer revolves around managing one relationship. This expansion can be unsettling to someone who expects to be the central focus. They may feel less significant, not because you are rejecting them, but because you are no longer shrinking your life to accommodate them. Another important aspect of healing is emotional regulation. You become less easily provoked. Attempts to draw you into drama or conflict don't land the same way. This can feel confusing to someone who is used to strong emotional reactions as a form of connection. The absence of that reaction is often felt as distance or loss. What makes healing so impactful is that it cannot be argued with. It doesn't invite debate. You are not claiming to be better than anyone. You are simply better to yourself. That self-respect changes how you show up in every interaction. You listen differently. You respond differently. You choose differently. There is also a deeper layer to this. Healing often involves grieving what you didn't receive. Once that grief is processed, you stop looking to the same person to fill an emotional gap they never could. This release can feel like freedom to you, and like irrelevance to someone who depended on your unmet needs. Growth doesn't require distance to be visible. Even if contact continues, the dynamic changes. You are less available for emotional labor. You don't chase resolution at the expense of your peace. You don't personalize their limitations. This neutrality can be more confronting than anger because it reflects acceptance without attachment. Ultimately, your healing is not about teaching someone a lesson. It's about reclaiming your life. Any discomfort it creates for someone else is a byproduct, not the goal. And that is what makes it so powerful and so lasting. Silence is often misunderstood as avoidance or weakness, especially in emotionally charged relationships. Many people are taught that if something hurts, the healthiest response is to explain it clearly and repeatedly until the other person understands. In narcissistic dynamics, this instinct can become a trap. Explanation turns into over-explaining, and over-explaining turns into giving someone endless material to dismiss, distort, or use against you. Silence in this context is not about withholding information to control someone. It's about recognizing when communication no longer serves understanding. When every conversation ends in confusion, defensiveness, or reversal of blame, continuing to explain doesn't bring clarity. It often brings more exhaustion. Silence becomes a way of stepping out of a cycle that leads nowhere. For someone with narcissistic patterns, explanations can feel like invitations. They invite debate, reinterpretation, and power struggles. Your words may be picked apart, reframed, or turned into evidence against you. Over time, this can make you doubt your own reality. Choosing silence removes that opening. It doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. It simply refuses to participate in conversations that erode your sense of self. This kind of silence is not sudden or dramatic. It often shows up gradually. You stop responding immediately. You keep replies brief and factual. You don't fill pauses with emotional disclosures. You let conversations end without forcing resolution. These small shifts may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are used to smoothing things over. Silence can feel risky because it challenges old survival strategies. Many people learned early that being understood was tied to safety or acceptance. Letting go of explanation can feel like giving up on being seen. But in unhealthy dynamics, being seen accurately may never be possible. Accepting that can be painful, but it can also be freeing. To a narcissistic person, silence can feel louder than words because it removes their usual role in the exchange. They may interpret it as distance, dismissal, or lack of interest. What they are often reacting to is the loss of influence. Without your explanations, they have less material to shape the narrative. Silence also creates space for observation. When you stop explaining, you start noticing how often the other person speaks without listening, how quickly they redirect conversations back to themselves, how rarely they ask questions with genuine curiosity. This clarity is not about judging them, it's about understanding the limits of the interaction. Another important aspect of silence is that it preserves your emotional energy. Explaining takes effort. It requires vulnerability and hope. When those offerings are consistently mishandled, silence becomes an act of self-protection. You are not shutting down your feelings. You are choosing where they belong. Silence can also interrupt patterns of escalation. In many unhealthy dynamics, conversations intensify through back and forth engagement. Each response fuels the next. Silence breaks that rhythm. It doesn't add fuel. It allows emotions to settle rather than spike. This doesn't mean silence is always the right response. With safe and emotionally available people, communication is essential. The difference lies in discernment. Silence becomes healthy when it's used in situations where words have consistently failed to create understanding or respect. For someone used to constant engagement, silence can be unsettling. They may try to provoke a response through criticism, urgency, or emotional appeals. Holding silence in these moments requires grounding. It's not about winning, it's about staying aligned with your values and well-being. Over time, silence helps you reconnect with your own voice. When you're not constantly explaining yourself, you hear your own thoughts more clearly. You become less reactive and more intentional. This internal shift changes how you approach all relationships, not just difficult ones. Silence is not emptiness. It's presence without performance. It's choosing not to narrate your pain to someone who cannot hold it with care. And in dynamics built on control through conversation, that choice can quietly change everything. Self-respect often begins quietly. It doesn't announce itself or demand attention. It shows up in the way you speak to yourself, the choices you make when no one is watching, and the standards you stop negotiating. In relationships shaped by narcissistic patterns, self-respect can feel unfamiliar because the focus has long been on keeping the other person satisfied, calm, or impressed. When you start honoring your own values, something subtle but powerful happens. You no longer bend yourself to fit someone else's expectations. You don't abandon your needs to avoid conflict. You don't measure your worth by how useful or pleasing you are. This internal alignment changes how you move through the world, and that change is often felt by others, even if it's never discussed. For someone who relies on external validation and control, self-respect can function like a mirror. Not a mirror you hold up deliberately, but one that exists simply because you are no longer distorting yourself. When you stop shrinking, exaggerating, or apologizing for existing, the contrast becomes visible. Your steadiness reflects their instability without a single accusation being made. Self-respect shows up in your tone. You speak calmly and clearly. You don't rush to defend yourself. You allow pauses in conversation without filling them with justification. This composure is not rehearsed. It's the result of knowing you don't need approval to be grounded. That kind of presence can feel uncomfortable to someone who is used to emotional leverage. It also shows up in your choices. You say no when something doesn't align with you. You leave situations that drain you. You stop engaging in conversations that revolve around blame or confusion. These decisions are not reactive. They are thoughtful, and thoughtfulness disrupts dynamics built on impulse and control. Self-respect changes what you tolerate. Disrespect no longer gets reframed as misunderstanding. Repeated harm is no longer minimized. This doesn't mean you become rigid or unforgiving. It means you trust yourself enough to acknowledge patterns and respond accordingly. That trust in yourself is something a narcissistic person often struggles to maintain internally. When you operate from self-respect, you don't need to prove your pain. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth. You simply live in a way that reflects it. This can feel confronting to someone who depends on comparison or hierarchy to feel secure. Your grounded presence removes the need for competition because you are no longer playing that game. There is also a shift in how you handle disagreement. You don't escalate to be heard. You don't collapse to keep the peace. You hold your position without hostility. This balance can feel disarming because it doesn't fit into familiar patterns of dominance or submission. It exists outside of them. Self-respect also restores your relationship with yourself. You begin to notice when something feels off instead of ignoring it. You respond to discomfort early rather than waiting for it to become unbearable. This responsiveness builds inner safety, and inner safety reduces dependence on external validation. For someone with narcissistic tendencies, this independence can feel like distance or loss. Not because you are withdrawing affection deliberately, but because you are no longer available to meet needs that override your own. The relationship shifts from one-sided regulation to mutual presence, or it reveals that mutuality was never possible. What makes self-respect so impactful is that it doesn't require explanation. You don't need to announce boundaries or growth constantly. Your actions speak. You show up consistently, honestly, and without self-betrayal. That consistency is what reflects truth most clearly. Over time, self-respect becomes a stable foundation. It guides your decisions, protects your energy, and shapes your relationships. And in dynamics that once relied on your self-doubt or flexibility, that foundation changes everything simply by existing. When you look at all of this together, a clear pattern emerges. Real impact does not come from trying to hurt someone back or forcing them to understand your pain. That approach keeps you emotionally tied to the very dynamic that caused the damage. What creates change is stepping out of that cycle and choosing yourself in steady, grounded ways. The shift happens through consequences, not confrontation, through emotional disengagement, not dramatic reactions, through boundaries that are lived, not argued, through healing that changes how you show up, through silence that protects your energy, through self-respect that no longer asks for permission. None of these are about punishment. They are about reality taking shape. When you stop organizing your life around someone else's behavior, the balance changes. You become less available for confusion, manipulation, or emotional exhaustion. Your calm, your clarity, and your consistency speak louder than explanations ever could. What once felt like power over you quietly dissolves. The deepest truth is this: the moment you begin living from self-respect and inner stability, you are no longer trying to make anyone feel anything. You are reclaiming your time, your energy, and your sense of self. And that shift, whether acknowledged or not, is where the real impact lives.